So the supplies you're going to need for this class are paper, scissors, fabric scissors, a straight edge ruler, about 1 yard of knit fabric, tracing paper, your marking utensils. I'm going to use Sharpies so you can see what I'm doing. You're going to need a flexible measuring tape, and you're going to need your block pattern. If you have your knit body block pattern all still on one piece, then go ahead and grab that piece. If you have your pieces separate, grab the back piece. That's what I'm going to use here. We're going to be grabbing 2 measurements off of this to make sure that we draft a sleeve that fits directly into this block. That way, when you go through drafting and making your final pieces and your final creations, you will have both a bodice and a sleeve that work directly together. So just a quick note about measurements. We are going to be plotting our pattern block in centimeters. So if you decide to take your measurements in inches, you will need to convert them into centimeters. And you'll notice also on the measurement sheet for this class, at the link below this video, that everything is in centimeters. So it's okay if you want to record just the few measurements that we need in inches, but you will need to convert them. There are plenty of free apps available on all the smartphone devices, and there's also free conversion calculators all over the internet. So just Google it and find one, or you can just record your measurements from centimeters from jump. Okay, we're just gonna grab a few measurements for our sleeve block. Grab your flexible tape measure, and you're gonna place that tape measure at the top of your shoulder, and you're going to just find that hinge. When you flap your arm, you're gonna feel a little hinge there, and that's where you're gonna place your tape measure. Relax your arm. And this works best if you take this measurement in the mirror if you are by yourself. If you have someone, have them go ahead and grab the measurement that is right above your wrist. But if you are not, go ahead, if you are not with someone and you can't have them look at that measurement for you, then you can also just look in a mirror and grab that measurement. The next measurement is going to be your wrist circumference. And you just wrap your tape measure around your wrist and take that measurement. And just as a guideline, we're going to add a short sleeve length as well. So again, placing it from the top, you're going to look in the mirror or have someone tell you at any point where you want to add a short sleeve line. The beauty in our sewing is that, you know, short sleeve can mean anything, right? I mean, you can do a cap sleeve to a true short sleeve, to a 3/4 sleeve, whatever you want. But we like to just add a little guideline there on our pattern just to have as a reference. The last measurement that we're going to take is actually on our body block, so I'm going to grab that. So for the measurements we're going to be taking off of the block, again, you either need to be working on the full block piece that has both your front and back on it, or work on your back piece. So we're going to take the straight points from the end of the shoulder point to the top of that side seam, not including the seam allowance. So the top edge of the end of that shoulder point down to the top point of that side seam. Again, not including seam allowance. So if you don't have your original lines and original points here, then go ahead and just mark off this corner here of the seam allowance just to make sure, and up here just to make sure that you're getting the right measurement. So go ahead and record that in your worksheet. And now the second measurement is going to be this top point here, the very, very top center point of the back pattern piece, straight down the back, directly across from that top side seam. So we're going to measure from here to here. So here to here. And these are going to be your plot A and your plot B on your sleeve block worksheet. And so now what you're going to do is take the measurements that we just took from your body and from your block, plug those into the worksheet, and you're going to come out with your final plot points, which we're going to use to draft. And again, if you don't have that worksheet, the link is below this video. So first things first, we're going to mark our plot A. Starting towards the top of your paper, you want to leave yourself a couple of inches towards the top. We're going to plot point A. And so we're going to draw a straight line all the way down to the length of our long sleeve, which is point C. And remember, we are plotting in centimeters. Okay, so we've got A and C, and let's draw that line. So now we're going to plot B. So the A to B length is what we're going to plot. And if I'm tripping you up with these points, make sure that you have done your measurements and calculations on the worksheet below this video. Okay, so we've got B and C. And now we're going to plot our short sleeve length, which is point G as in girl. Okay. Okay, so you've got a straight line here. You've got point A, B, G as in girl, and C. So now we're going to draw point D, and we're going to draw a diagonal line. And make sure this line is diagonal, okay? And so I've got a grid table that I can see the lines underneath this, but you want to make sure that your line is diagonal, okay? And we're going to draw a straight line right here for now. And that's your point D. And so now we're going to plot point E, but we're going to start from D, so we're going to plot D to E. And I'm going to flip my ruler because we're kind of measuring backwards that way, right? Use my smaller ruler. So plot D to E here. So we've got A, E, and D. So I want you to make a little mark of 0.6 centimeters inward between D and E. So it's a very small mark, and you think, well, it may seem insignificant, but about halfway in between D and E, I want you to mark a small little guide point here on the inside of that line. So it should be placed in between these two lines right here. Now we're going to use that dot as a guide point to curve and connect D and E. Like that. Okay? Now between E and A, we're going to make a point on the outside of that line for 2 centimeters. Right there. And then we're going to do the same. We're going to connect those lines and curve it the opposite way. And so there. So you start to see that sleeve piece right there. So coming down to the bottom, we're going to plot F. So we're going to do C to F, straight across. Okay, that's the base of our sleeve opening. Then we're going to take our longer ruler and we're going to connect D to F. See that sleeve taking shape there. And so plot G, we're just going to square that across, draw a straight line across. And we're going to plot H. So you see the shape of the long sleeve version. What we're going to do now is add a little curve here so that when you want to trace off the short sleeve version, you'll have a natural curve that'll give you a more snug fit. So starting from point H, you're going to just measure in 1.5 centimeters. That's going to be your I. And you're going to connect D to I with a slight curve. So we're not going to go straight across. We're going to do a slight curve. So I've drafted everything in red. So I'm just going over this with a darker color just so you can see very clearly the actual pattern. And then from there, we will add our seam allowance. Okay, so we've got our long sleeve and we've got our short sleeve. And again, this is half the pattern, so technically if you wanted to, you can cut it out on the fold if you would like. And so I'm actually going to keep this original intact. I'm not going to add seam allowance to this. And I'm just going to label it knit sleeve block May 2018, just so I know when I made this. And so I always like to keep a copy of my blocks with no seam allowance, and so that way I can trace them and then add my seam allowance. So next I'm just going to add some tracing paper over that pattern. As you can see, I love this tracing paper because you can see very easily through it, just for purposes like this. And so to test the fit on my sleeve, I'm going to add my seam allowance on this piece and then cut out the whole piece with the seam allowance included. So using my ruler, I prefer to use 1/2 inch. At this point, you could go ahead and revert back to your regular measurements because we're just creating an actual pattern. But I like to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And so I'm using my dressmaker's ruler to add that seam allowance. If you don't have a ruler like this, I highly recommend it. I added this information in the supplies list. Highly recommend this ruler, especially for cases like this. So again, I am tracing outside of my pattern piece line, adding my 1/2 inch seam allowance. However, I would highly recommend that you use the same seam allowance that you used for your knit block. As a matter of fact, use the same seam allowance on every single block that you make, just so you know what to expect when you're sewing. So I'm going to add my 1/2 inch down here. Okay. And I'm not going to add seam allowance here because this is the fold. This is the halfway point of that pattern. So we just want to leave this intact. So I just added my 1/2 inch to the bottom of the seam. And then I'm going to add my 1/2 inch to the curved area here. And I'm so used to drafting at a 1/2 inch that I can eyeball it and tell. And I'm just going to go ahead and add in just that original line. Like I said, I'm going to cut my sleeve on the fold of my fabric. There. Now, if you are wanting to test the short sleeve version, then all you would need to do is just draw in your short sleeve line here and add your seam allowance here. And you don't have to worry about tracing this part. But I'm just going to go ahead and test the whole sleeve. So now that that's done, I'm going to cut out my pattern piece. And so I've got my long sleeve pattern with seam allowances added here, ready for me to test. And my original pattern is completely intact. This way, if I find that when I'm fitting and testing my knit pattern, that I need to make some adjustments, then I can simply go back to this pattern and make those adjustments. I have not cut it out. I have not disturbed it in any manner. It just makes life a lot easier. So now just grab your pattern. You want to cut out one sleeve on the fold of your fabric, and you want to grab your knit block as well, because we're going to test the fit of those together. So now that you've got your pattern fitted and everything fits how it wants, I have adjusted mine when I showed you that I needed to shorten it. So I shortened it about 2 inches here. That's why I've got that little flap of paper where I taped it. So I've got all of that situated. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to trace it onto another piece of paper to be my final block pattern. And it's going to look like the traditional whole sleeve piece that we're used to seeing when we use commercial patterns. So I've got a clean piece of paper here, and I'm going to put my block pattern underneath my paper. It's just easier for me to trace that way, just so things don't shift on me. And I'm going to grab my ruler just to make sure the lines that should be straight remain straight. The first thing that I want to do is I want to make a center mark at the very top of my sleeve cap. So I'm just going to put a dash there that lets me know that this is the middle. I will also want that mark on my sleeve pattern so I know where to connect at my shoulder seam. And I'm just going to give myself a little mark here at the bottom. It's just a little guideline for me here at the bottom. So I know when I draw the other side of this, I know where to line up my pattern. And so I'm just simply going to go over it and trace. Then I'm going to be flipping it. And that's also another good guideline to have. So I've got one side done. And then I'm going to lift my paper up and I'm going to flip my pattern over the opposite way and slide it back under my paper. And I'm using those guidelines that I've just traced to help me line up my pattern in the exact spot that I need it to be in. And I'm just going to trace the other side. Okay, so now you have your final sleeve block pattern. If you'd like, you can keep this one. I like to just keep all of my drafts, but this is the final piece that I'll be working off of. And this is what I suggest for you. Another thing that you can do, if you would like, is to retrace this again and trace off only the short sleeve. So now you have a whole piece for your long sleeve, and then you'll have a whole piece for your short sleeve. It just saves you a little bit of time for having the two separate patterns already done. And so right now I am filming in May 2018. It is warm outside, so it is likely I won't be using this long sleeve very much outside of this class. So for me, it may be beneficial to go ahead and trace off that short sleeves, and so I'm already working with that for all of the pieces that I want to create for the summer and the fall. So either way, it is totally up to you. You've got it built in, but either way, it's totally up to you. So this is your final piece. Now it's time for you to go and create some looks with your custom fit block.